The Freedmen's Bank was a tool to confiscate the remaining wealth of Aboriginal Indians who were not part of the Native American reservation system. Let's look at how the Northern Unionist, evangelical Protestant, abolitionist, capitalist banking clique performed this confiscation. First of all, let's make sure most people understand that the Aboriginal Indians were experts at farming and agriculture, especially in the Southeast. They'd been there for generations, thousands of years. And contrary to popular opinion, slaves were valued as assets. So therefore, they're often paid in cash. They're also allowed to sell plantation product for their own profit, and they even inherited parts of the plantations when masters died. So there's plenty of wealth accumulated over many generations. Okay, so here we are. It's 1865. They've decimated the South. There's a bunch of Union Army soldiers on all the plantations. They've created this Freedmen's Bureau that you see here. Okay, and look what this bureau, these agents are allowed to do. Okay, they're able to control access to food, education, legal aid. All right, the South was literally starving. They destroyed the plantations at the end of the war. Had to, be agreeable to these Union military officers as well as the agents of the new regime, the Freedmen's Bureau. The first way they funnel them into the Freedmen's Bank is they pretty much exclude them from the new national banking system that this Congress, this abolitionist Congress, created in 1864. And that national banking system actually had some deposit insurance plus serious oversight by the federal government through the United States Treasury. As a matter of fact, I've looked at the legislation. It actually had a very high capital reserve requirement of basically like 30%. They had to purchase treasury bonds for the United States Treasury, all right, and then keep 30% of those bonds with the government, with the United States Treasury. Meanwhile, they create the Freedmen's Bank that has none of these protections, none of them. So the next thing is that the banks, the Freedmen banks, are located in strategic places where the big plantations were and where there were clusters of these Aboriginal communities that had been quote unquote set free. Really, what had happened is their land and their jobs have been destroyed by the burning through of the South. So, what kind of assets did these Aboriginal Indians possess? Well, they still actually had land, or they had work land, and under their tribal systems or under the old Confederate state systems, they would have had titles and deeds. Here, your only option is to give us the titles to your land, and we'll put them in our safety deposit boxes, right? And we're going to use your land as collateral to make loans and investments. But of course, they weren't making loans and investments to the Southern freedmen, to this class of people that was depositing with them. They were taking this money, all right, and investing it in railroad stocks and steamboat shipping company stocks and new electric stocks. All this stuff is being done by the shareholders and trustees of the Freedmen's Bank. There was no oversight by Congress. There was no oversight by the Treasury. There was no insurance. Okay, then they, after 5 years, actually changed their own corporate charter to allow them to invest in anything. So it goes on and on what they were doing here. So how would these Union Army officers and these Freedmen's Bureau agents, sell this to them? They would tell the Indians that this was created specifically for this. This was an Indian-friendly bank, right? Okay, and besides the Bureau and besides the military, you also have this new group of like evangelical Protestant groups coming down, in particular the Methodists, the Baptists, and the Presbyterians, and they're like the unofficial social and cultural arm of the Union. Okay, they're coming down there, they're taking over old Indian infrastructure, their schools, they're taking over their mills, they're taking over their farms. Okay, the schools they would turn into schools to train the new white European people in the system as well, because they were actually being imported from all over Eastern Europe for the most part in the Caucasus regions. So they actually had to be trained in this new system of land ownership and surveyed land and, frankly, how to farm. Meanwhile, they had other schools turned into re-education and indoctrination schools for the Indians. That's what was going on. And these are the three religious organizations that were deeply, on the record, tied to it. So once they've accumulated and attracted all these land titles, these deeds, okay, therefore, when the bank collapses due to investing in initial public offerings and crazy stock market things, they're able to just turn around and go, oh, sorry, your deposits are gone. Now, the next question might be, well, okay, that stinks that I lost my dollars, but I had a title in there to my 200 acres of land in this part of Georgia. What happened to that title? Oh, funny thing happened after the bank went bankrupt. These records got destroyed. This is literally what they did. This is on the record. This is how the rulers of the United States that won the Civil War, these wonderful abolitionists, these moral Puritans, these Methodists, Baptists, and Presbyterians, this is what they did. There's nobody else in charge but them. Just read this one. It speaks for itself. Here's a specific example of the 1874 DC branch fire. Of course, that was the largest of all the institutions in the Freedmen's banking system. This shows what happened in the southern branch. They literally closed their doors overnight and immediately began burning the records. I mean, they have these accounts in the newspapers of union officers and contractors clearing out the offices, destroying files, and boarding up buildings. Then even the National Archive, whoops, we lost them. So what can you say? There's nothing good to say about this. Here's another slick way. In 1870, they altered their charter so that the banks, the individual bank branches, no longer need to hold original deposit certificates or land title receipts. So you're native, or you're an Aboriginal Indian. You own a couple hundred acres. You brought to them the paperwork, which would be a title, okay, a land title receipt, and that's the only one you have. We don't have copy machines back then. You have to understand what banks meant, and historically, way before the United States of America, banks. That's why banks in ancient times were actually subsumed under temples. Okay, yeah, that's right. Temples and churches were stores of wealth. So now that all the records about the property tiles are destroyed, they now have an excuse to resurvey the land. The county government takes control of it, and then they conduct property sales to two types of people: very wealthy northern banks who are buying up large tracts. Example of Sanford, Florida, a unionist general, rich guy named Sanford buys 12,000 acres and starts to colonize it with poor people from Sweden to start a celery farm. Yes, that is true. No, it did not succeed. Okay, so now you see the setup, right? They've confiscated their money wealth through the bankruptcy. But the way to confiscate the land wealth is they have to lose the titles, right? So then they burn all the information after the bankruptcy. Now you have the excuse to resurvey, reorganize the land into parcels, smaller parcels, and now start to sell it off. Selling it off to the big banks to start new plantations and colonies, and selling it off to this new group of imported, pauperish, Caucasian, Eastern European white people that they're flooding the country with at the tune of about 500,000 people a year from 1880 to 1920. Thank you for listening. I hope you found this enjoyable and interesting. Stay tuned for my next part on the Freedmen's Bank when I go into specifics of people and towns in which the wealth transfer occurred. Handsome History out.